Hello and welcome to the Convos Cultural Update. It's great to have you with us. Today we have an interview with Kyle Vegter and Julia Miller, who are two of the five co-artistic directors of the Chicago-based Emmy Award-winning company Manual Cinema. They are a performance collective, a design studio, and a film and video production company, and so much more, all rooted in the art of handmade shadow puppetry mixed with live action video, cinematic techniques, and live sound and music scores that ultimately do one simple, beautiful thing. They tell exquisite, immersive, and compelling stories. Purdue audiences may remember experiencing Manual Cinema in March of 2016 with their beautiful production, Lula del Rey. It's filled with mid-century images of the American Southwest with a live music score inspired by the music of Hank Williams, Roy Orbison, and Patsy Cline. Here's the sparking memory. Here are a few clips from the film trailer, Lula del Rey. Okay, as you can see in their hands, any kind of technology can be transformed into something truly remarkable. Since their time at Purdue, their career has been nothing short of remarkable. They've won an Emmy, as well as had Peabody Award nominations for their work on a documentary produced by the New York Times entitled The Forger, which told the story of the celebrated Paris forger, Adolf Kaminsky, who, through his efforts to create documents and passports, saved the lives of over 14,000 Jews during World War II. It's an extraordinary story and made all the more beautiful by their contributions to the project. The company has also had highly lauded runs at the Edinburgh Festival Fringe, of course near and dear to my heart, as you all know, as well as large-scale collaborations with other film companies, theater companies, and dance projects, and so much more as the scope of their work has expanded. So for this interview, I caught up with Kyle and Julia in Chicago so we could talk about their work and their inspiration, and especially their process. So enjoy the interview. Well, Julia and Kyle, welcome to the Convos Cultural Update. It's great to have you with us on behalf of Manual Cinema. Great to have you here.
Hi, thanks for having us.
Thanks for having us. Yep, good to be here.
Well, we've been going around the world talking to artists about what they've been doing and keeping up with their output and just seeing what's on the mind of the creative forces. So we're happy to drop into Chicago and talk to some folks up the street from us in West Lafayette and see how things are going. So I think the last time we crossed paths was during the Frankenstein run and at the Edinburgh Festival Fringe. That was another smash success for Manual Cinema in Edinburgh, following, I guess, Ada Ava was the previous big smash there. So I think our audiences here at Purdue have been following what's happening at the Edinburgh Festival Fringe because we have brought numerous performances from there. So when they hear about sellout performances that run for a month, you know, they understand this is not a small accomplishment, that in that crowded marketplace, it's a big deal. So we're glad to see you again and glad to have you with us. So I want to jump right in and congratulate you both and the whole company on 10 amazing years of creative output. Who would have thought?
Thank you.
It's true congratulations to you all for 10 amazing years.
Yeah, thank you.
It's wild.
It's crazy to think about.
So what's in store for the 10th? I know you have a celebration planned.
Yeah, we're hosting, we're putting everything that was supposed to be live, making it virtual, which does mean it's more accessible to people outside of Chicago now. So we're doing a retro spectacular where we premiere 4 different productions over the last 10, that we've created over the last 10 years. And then it culminates on August 22nd for a live stream event that we're dubbing our fundraiser, where it's kind of like a mix of a variety show where we'll be premiering a new piece that's been made to be streamed live. We'll have special guests of other artists that we work with, and it'll be a really fun, about an hour event on the 22nd that sort of tops off the 10-year celebration.
And just to tag on to that, each of the 4 shows will run for a week, and by run we mean will be available online to watch 24/7, so kind of on demand. And all of it is free, or just donate what you can. So there'll be a little donate link, and we'd appreciate it if people could give whatever they can. But yeah, everything will be up for free, and we hope it's an opportunity for audience that have maybe seen 1 or 2 manual cinema shows to get a little bit more of a background of our work and see some more shows.
That's great. Well, we'll post the links down below for all of our Convos viewers, and heard me use this platform in the past to continue to support independent artists and companies that are working hard right now to continue to stay afloat and do creative work along the way. It's absolutely important. So I invite the Purdue audiences to go to these links and participate in the retro spectacular, and certainly support the company. I noted with interest that you're earmarking some of the proceeds to go to the original performers in the productions, and that's not only is it a beautiful thing, it's really right. So congratulations to you guys for continuing to support your own community as well as you do this.
Yeah, I mean, we just know it's a crazy time for, we can't tour our work right now, and a part of the original devising of this run was that we'd be able to hire all these performers we've been working with for the last many years. So we're trying to find ways to support them even though we can't be working with them right now. So the 10% goes towards the performers in the archival and the performers that we would have hired to do the live run, as just like a gesture for us to try to support them in a way that we can right now.
Well, that's great. Well, I know that many people are very curious about the seemingly unbridled creativity that you bring to your work. And so I'd certainly like to take this moment to refresh everyone on, you guys are storytellers. So let's talk about the manual cinema origin story. How did it come together?
We all met in Chicago in around 2009, 2010. I had been working with a spectacle theater company called Red Moon Theater, and that was my introduction to a lot of puppetry. I'd come from a performance theater background, and that's where I met another co-artistic director, Sarah Fernacey, whose partner is Drew Durr, so I met both of them through that. And we had come together to work on this little project. I had been introduced to overhead projector puppetry through Red Moon. We'd done a production of Swan Lake with the CSO, so I wanted to try it out myself. I fortuitously found an overhead projector in my garage that was my landlord's, because he, in the past, had been like a medical lecturer, but didn't use it anymore. So I pulled it out. Drew and I made a bunch of puppets, and I was looking for music for it. And Ben and Kyle were in a band at the time. And I asked them if I could use some of their songs. They were like, totally sure. Do you want us to write some new music for you? I said, yes, absolutely. That would be awesome. And so that production was called The Ballad of Lula Del Rey. And it's the show that we all came together and worked in this kind of format where it was like one overhead projector. The music was live cued.
Mm-hmm. But not performed live, yeah.
And there were like 3 of us performing the show. It was like 25 minutes long. and it went really well. So that was sort of like the first time we all came together, and then we performed it all over the city in bars and like whatever spaces would have us. Our friends invited us to play at their loft show, and so we just kind of showed up, put the screen together, would do the puppets, and then we were like interested in making a new work, so we came up with a name, and the next project we worked on was a proto version of Ada Eva, which so Lula and Ada Eva were the sort of the first two projects we worked on together. And then, yeah, we just kept making things.
Yeah, the formation of the company was pretty organic and pretty focused on the work. Like, we never really sat down and said, okay, we're gonna start a company and this is gonna be our careers, and we're gonna go full in on this. You know, we all had outside work that we were working on. We all certainly had day jobs for probably the first 5 or 6 years of the company. And we just liked making work, and people kept asking us to perform it, and so we just kind of kept making stuff. And at some point it made sense for us to do it full time. Actually, the original reason we even formed an LLC was because we performed at Theater on the Lake, which is a city venue, beautiful theater right on the lake in Chicago. And the city needed to pay an entity rather than a business entity.
We had to get a tax number or
rather
tax
than
ID.
a person. Yeah. So
we're like, no, what do we do?
Yeah, we're like, oh, I guess we'll form a company, right? So yeah, we've tried to stay true to the work, and the administration of the company is really built up just to support that work.
Well, there's certainly there's a long history of puppetry and shadow puppetry, of course, ballet in China, across Asia. And it's no one can watch your work and not know that there's 100 years of cinematic history behind your eyes, in the work, the way that you think about it, the way it sounds, the way it functions. And so, I don't have to ask you guys if you're film junkies or puppetry junkies, because the answer is self-evident, but how does the history of these forms influence your work?
I would say it goes both ways, in that we're drawing on a vocabulary that we also know the audience is really familiar with. And people have an innate sense of cinematic vocabulary just from like all the media we consume, where they understand the meaning of like a close-up or a far shot. And so we find using that language to tell our stories, we already have sort of like an access point because of the shared vocabulary we're using. But we just happen to be using it in this very specific format. And I think it's like using, visual metaphor and motif. We're using these kind of like iconic styles, or even recreating shots that are iconic from film and putting them into our shows. So yeah, each production kind of will draw from like a specific film or a film genre. And we understand that will be a touch point for people that have also seen that film to understand, or an access point for our work as well. And we just find it inspiring because each project we work on, each story has a different style and a different aesthetic. So we are always drawing from different film styles, like silent film or cartoons, or Wes Anderson or Purdue.
Yeah. I would just add that maybe surprisingly, none of us has a formal background in puppetry or film. We all have kind of different backgrounds. Julia, Drew, and Sarah, who are kind of the visual team of the company, studied physical theater, visual art. And Ben and I come from a music background, literature, sound, stuff like that. But none of us have really like studied film or puppetry formally. We all just love film, and I'd say have a pretty like populist idea about like what films we like none of us are like super film junkies that like know everything about everything, and I think that maybe gives us a little bit of freedom, maybe helped us to create this medium that we just were coming at it as kind of like amateur enthusiasts. I think that maybe helped us to feel like we could experiment and sort of create something new and create something that was our own.
And I feel like that's baked into the history of puppetry as well, in that it's such a cool art form and that you can come at it from so many directions. You know, there's visual artists that come to the form, theater artists, storytellers, writers, musicians. Like it really, you can really invent your own thing based on like what you're interested in. So I feel like the medium provides that space and that opportunity for exploration and experimentation in a way that's unique to puppetry performance in a cool way. Not to say that we aren't drawing from a lot of, you know, there's a shared vocabulary and toolkit that I think, you know, all puppetry artists use, like, you know, using tempo and focus, and but there's still a lot of room for you to sort of bring your own take or your own style to the format. That is exciting.
Right.
I do think now we're all maybe a little more sensitive when we're watching films to like, oh, that shot would be so cool. Like we need to figure out a way to create that shot, or like, oh, I love what they did with that sound and how it moved around the room, and like maybe I can incorporate something like that into our next piece. And kind of for every new feature-length piece, we usually have like 3 or 4 films that we reference towards the beginning of the process and that we all watch and are kind of like in our minds as we're making the piece.
Right.
So that's been something that's really useful for us, just like drawing influence from many different kinds of film.
Right. Well, the one thing that we have known, certainly over the 10 years of your company's existence, is that the function of YouTube as a platform in society has changed dramatically. You know, an exponential explosion in the amount of video content available.
Yeah.
And so there are many vocabularies out there, and you know, in some ways, I'm not suggesting for a moment that what you do is merely video, but I'm simply saying that the craft that you're engaging in, this visual medium, this sonic medium, this marriage, there are huge numbers of practitioners now, and so I think the ways in which your work could also be inspiring others, you know, kind of has the opportunity to go full circle, because people are soaking up so much content. They're looking for exemplars. You know, you had responded in some ways to some of the filmic inspiration that you've had, and yet now you're a part of that vocabulary that inspires others, and it has this continued opportunity to feed itself.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned video, because I feel like we talked a lot about that early on, as everyone has such a specific relationship to screens now.
Right.
And we don't often get to consider like how those images are being made. And something that's really a huge part of our aesthetic and ethos is the manualness, in that we are sharing with you the final image on stage, but below you can see everything happening in real time and how it's being made. And I feel like that is such a direct response to like the digital age, and showing the handmade quality, showing that like the magic of the animating the inanimate, and seeing that we're performing that in real time, as well as like the cinematic quality of the final image and experience. So like that theatrical hybrid, I feel like is something that we were really interested in exploring, or the cinematic theatrical hybrid, because I feel like, especially now where everything is you know, so slick and smooth, there's something to see how the sausage is made, you know, which I think is like also part of like, there's like a huge movement for like, you know, cottage industry right now, or like in the last couple of years, like Etsy, and like people do want to see something that's like handmade, and like the human touch is a huge part of like, you know, our work and just like the humanity of it. And I feel like that's also something that has been interesting for us to segue into our video and film work, is that how do we still capture the fact that this is handmade, that this is manual. And that's something we've been experimenting as we work with more animation of, do you see the you know, like the strings? Do you see the puppeteer's hand? you see the rough edges of the paper, because, you know, again, that's such a huge part of like our aesthetic and our process is the handmade quality. And as we've explored more in video, we've been trying to keep pushing to show the human touch and the human element.
Right.
And the kind of manual part of manual cinema has always been important to the five of us, but it wasn't always a part of the live performance experience for the audience. So when we first started out, all the making was done behind the screen, away from the audience. The audience could maybe like peer around the screen and like get a sense that there were people back there doing something, but really they just saw the finished product. And it wasn't until we were asked to perform in a larger venue, where the small screen just wouldn't make sense, that we figured out our current setup, which is to have a large screen above the stage, and then all of the making happening live on stage in view of the audience.
Right.
And that was really, I feel like that moment was really where it felt like we were kind of like, we're kind of onto something. And audiences let us know that as well.
And it's crazy because we'd already been making work for 2 years, you know, so it was a lot of just like experimenting and learning about the medium. You know, we would add a second projector. Suddenly it was like we had 2 cameras where we could cut between images or crossfade. Then we added a third, which was crazy. Then we added a live actor in the mix on top of the puppetry. So we definitely just been like learning and experimenting and pushing it in new directions. And I feel like that's also been helpful in that it's such a limited format that we keep pushing. Basically each story we tell has a new set of challenges, and that we push the aesthetic in new directions based on that story we're trying to tell. And I feel like that has gone into the shows that we chose for the retrospectacular, and that each of them sort of show us experimenting with a new form in a way to better render the narrative that we're trying to the story we're trying to tell.
Well, I'm so glad we went right to process here, because I think the creative work, the work in the studio is so fascinating, and people are curious and they want to be inspired in the ways that you get inspired. And so you answered my first question in the process point, which was the duality of the performance and the presentation, and the fact that the art making is visible and very much a part of the aesthetic. So I love that in some ways you say, hey, we found ourselves here in that particular moment when it happened. But you know, it's interesting to me, you know, I also, you know, spent time in the studio, so I know about creative forces at work. There are 5 co-artistic directors in the company. And so I'm sure that there are pushes and pulls inside the creative process. And so how do you navigate those kinds of discussions, and do you adopt different roles on different productions, and how do you organize a team approach? I think it's fascinating for creative people to think about navigating not just the creative boundaries, but also the human factors of how do we work as a team.
Yeah, totally. I mean, it's definitely a struggle at times, but I think it is like one of our great assets, that between the 5 of us, we have expertise in like most aspects of creating this kind of work. Like one of us has a background in sound, one of us has a background in physical theater. We can kind of figure most things out between the 5 of us, and that's been a really big asset for us. When we first started out, we didn't have clear roles or like defined roles, and it was just kind of like the 5 of us putting a thing together. And as we developed and started making more work, we figured out that it would just like streamline the process a lot more to give ourselves titles on any given project.
And provide ownership in that, like, okay, I am in charge of directing or outside eyeing, you are in charge of sound design, like you're in charge of puppet design. And so we sort of, when separating the roles, had a clear idea of like what we were responsible for, which was helpful, as far as like another feature of assigning ourselves.
Yeah, and like the 5 of us still have input on pretty much everything. Like we're still giving notes to each other kind of throughout the process, but just having having it be clear throughout the five of us, like who's doing what on a project, is usually really helpful. And it does change from project to project. So like sometimes like Julia is like a lead writer on a project. Sometimes I'm the lead writer on a project. It stays pretty defined in the sort of like visual team and sound team. But in terms of writing and like coming up with new project ideas, that sort of floats around the five of us.
Mm-hmm.
So, Julia, you mentioned earlier that in the retrospectacular, you can see the evolution of the company over time, new creative explorations happening, expansions of technique and things. And, you know, the sound scores have gotten even more immersive and complex to support the work. How do you imagine that the arc of your vocabulary will continue to evolve as you look ahead?
You know, I think we're just still experimenting with new ways to stage, to create like cinematic techniques in the theater. I think we've started experimenting a couple of years ago of actors in front of the camera and puppetry in front of the camera, not just working in shadow. And Frankenstein also features a camera that is manipulated by a performer to show a character's POV through a tabletop puppet. So we've been experimenting with new forms of puppetry, but also with staging sort of these cinematic styles. I also think we are also pushing in exciting ways into film and animation more, which is also pushing the aesthetic and the style of our work. And we're excited to do that a lot more.
It's kind of like we'll get a commission for a film project and work on it, and the project will demand kind of inventing a new aspect of the medium, and then we'll be really excited about that and want to bring that to already existing works or to a new theatrical work. So the film work and the theater work kind of feed each other and help each other to grow. But I would just say that each project kind of like we generally let the project dictate what kinds of innovations they need. So we try to keep everything focused on the story and like, what does this story need? Does this story need a new kind of storytelling that we haven't invented yet? Does it need a new sound technique? Does it need a new approach? And that's usually where the innovation comes from. It comes from the stories themselves.
And sometimes we're just like, oh, it'd be really cool if there was like toy theater, if we played with this format, or is there a way for us to find a story that would implement this? And there's a lot of stuff that, because there are five of us and we all have just different interests and backgrounds, there's a lot of stuff we just haven't had the opportunity to explore yet, like VR, immersive theater, which we've like dabbled in a little bit, video games. Like there's a bunch of ways we could see like pivoting our skill set into different formats that are exciting to us. But I would say we're even like right now as we speak having to figure out what it means to make work right now in a pandemic. And that is actually kind of the newest frontier for us, in that we are literally combining our theatrical knowledge and our video knowledge to create a new hybrid for that August 22nd event of how do we make, because streaming the archival is great, but we're also miss live performance a lot, and we miss a live interaction with an audience. And now that we're sort of confined to this format of live stream, we are trying to create liveness in new ways, for at least for our company, to still be able to do some sort of engagement where it's not all pre-recorded. So we're premiering a new short piece at the August 22nd event that's sort of experimenting with a bunch of things. And then we're also working on a new show that will be is devised for the Zoom era for the holidays, which is an adaptation of A Christmas Carol. So we're trying to, be flexible and use it as an artistic challenge, but also be realistic in that there really, there are safety precautions we need to take. Like, what is appropriate for us to ask our staff? Like, what's PPE, do we take temperatures? We're coming up with all these safety protocols, and that means that although work is much smaller because we're limiting it to like the 5 artistic directors and still social distancing within the space to perform the show. So already in that, there's a lot of creative constraints that, like, how do you puppet a show with 3 puppeteers where one of them can only be 6 feet from the other at all times, or,
Right.
So we're in the process of learning some new things. Right.
Yeah, I'd say that's the big next hurdle. And just to clarify, we're trying to figure out how to perform shows live in our studio in Chicago, and then broadcast them to audiences wherever. And that's like the new kind of challenge for us. And like whether that's like via Zoom, whether there's like multiple cameras, just like which platform do we use, like how to make it feel super live, how to represent that it is live, so that audiences aren't just thinking, oh, this is just like more video content that's out there. Those are the big questions that we're thinking about right now, and that we're actively in the process of answering.
Right. Well, these are enormous questions for artists of all kinds, and we know that the artist and audience exchange, that communal experience, is so central to why we go to theater, to why we go to performance. And I think all of us have to give ourselves permission to to experience what we can experience safely right now, and go with it, because we know it is one place to still get access to that. You said liveness, because we're still trying to find the vocabulary, right? Even talk about the qualities that we are trying to experience, because it wouldn't have to be live to still watch it in the window.
Right.
Right.
But knowing that it's live does change it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, like anything could happen, right? Like we could make a mistake and have to recover from it, or the feed could go down, and like all of that, I think is just like ups the stakes, right? Like it makes it an event. Like, throughout your day, you're like, oh, there's a performance at 8 o'clock. It's only happening at 8 o'clock. I've got to be like at my computer screen, like ready to watch it. There is something different about it. And yeah, like you said, I think we're all trying to figure out like what is important about that, what is integral about that, and how can we represent it given all the constraints.
Well, I'd like to ask another aesthetics question, because I watched the very beautiful documentary, The Forager, that you did with the New York Times. And I will post links for our audience. You must watch this. It's an absolutely astonishing and beautifully told tale of a man who helped liberate 14,000 Jews from the Holocaust through his inventive use of forgery to create documents. And it's a beautifully told tale. And the recognition of the Emmy and everything, and the Peabody Award nominations for it, tremendous. But my first response is that when someone started talking, I recoiled a bit, because so used to your vocabulary being nonverbal, and that you give voice to character cinematically, non-verbally. And so you've had works that push and pull between that. And so I had to let go of that. And then I of course did. And I found the documentary to be spectacular. And yet it just raised the question for me of the role of the nonverbal in your work. And how do you think about it? And what burden does it put? And what opportunity does it create inside your work to lend voice to these inanimate objects?
I was going to say it's been a journey, because I feel like we had an unofficial rule early on that we were like nonverbal storytellers, but then collaborations and projects would come up, and we were like, if we're going to adapt the poetry of Federico Garcia Lorca,
right,
maybe there's room for text and dialogue. And what does that look like? And so, any good rule is made to be broken. So I think we definitely have been experimenting based on the content, how to engage with dialogue. And that's made itself visible in several ways. Like with the end of TV, we were using green screen and actors in front of the camera to to visualize television, and we used all this found audio from like vintage commercials that then they lip sync. So, you know, for us that captured like sort of the vibrancy and the like hyper technicolor of television versus like the everyday world was in shadow. Or with No Blue Memories, it's also about the life and work of Gwendolyn Brooks, and so text felt really important for that piece as well, and we had mics on the performers for certain scenes, and also some direct address poetry to the audience. So I think, and then Frankenstein has like title cards. So dialogue has played a lot of different roles in different projects. Mm-hmm. We still have shows that are nonverbal, and that's sort of our base vocabulary.
I think The Forger is a great example of that sort of like push and pull of the theater work and the video work, and kind of learning from both, and then ideas from one playing into the other. So it was an interesting challenge to think of the work with voiceover for the first time, and in some ways really great. Like all of a sudden there's a voice just telling you the story, so like we don't need to worry so much about like, is the audience understanding like exactly what the story is? Like there's someone telling it, so we can maybe take some more liberties with the puppetry and not be so bound to like we have to like tell every single detail. Like we can get a little more creative in other ways because of the voiceover. I do still think that kind of the bread and butter of manual cinema will be nonverbal storytelling, like we always kind of come back to that, and that there's an aspect of that in everything that we've ever done. I think like that keeps coming up, and I think we're all attracted to that just because it's such a challenge. It's such a challenging thing to do that you kind of constantly have to answer the question of how am I going to tell this story without words, and I feel like we're always answering that question and figuring out new ways to answer that question. And I feel like that's what that's a big part of what keeps us all engaged and keeps us all interested in making this kind of work.
Well, I just want to encourage my Purdue audience to watch The Forger, because there are some incredibly beautiful and iconic scenes of Paris that you conjure with the simplest detail. Of course, you know, the opening scene has the Eiffel Tower play its bit role as the scene opens, but there are those beautiful metro gates and things like where you, with shallow depth of field image making, you see these scenes and they just ring so true. It's absolutely gorgeous, and of course the content is rendered in such a sensitive way. So that leads me to really a question about the selection of work. You have some recurring themes, certainly, about love, finding love and belonging, actualization, and a lot of reflections on mortality that factor into this. So, of course, you're commenting on society's foibles along the way, sometimes slyly as an aside, sometimes as the point. And so, how do you think about contextual relevance with your work, and how do you select the work that you're going to take on?
Great question.
I mean, I think that selecting the work that we're going to take on happens pretty organically just in what the five of us are interested in. And it usually happens where one of the five of us will watch a film or see something in the news or read a book, and you know, a little light will go off, and oftentimes like one of us will just bring an idea to the rest of the five of us, and that's how a project starts. Sometimes those ideas come from outside the company, like sometimes a theater or a commissioner will reach out to us with an idea, and if we think it can work well in the medium, then we'll go for it. But yeah, I'd say it's pretty organic. And pretty just based on the interests of the five of us. And of course, we always want to be telling stories that are relevant for the moment. So I think that kind of takes care of itself organically too, that just like the work has to be relevant in order for audiences to want to see it. It has to be timely.
Yeah, I think we also just are responding to the environment we live in when we're working on shows. And so when we were working on the Magic City and Trump's rhetoric about like walls was happening, you know, and we definitely built that into the story of about you know, inclusion and literally have a wall that breaks down in that show. But it was just, you know, it's hard to not respond to the environment in which you live, and not that we're trying to create, not all our shows are necessarily taking place in present day, but what's happening in present day does make its way into the narrative that we are working on at that time. So
I do think the work shows growth in the five of us in that way, and that our really early work is not very political at all. Like, it's very much about like beauty and relationships and grieving. I'm talking mostly about Ada, Eva, and Lula, and
a little anti-capitalistic.
Yeah. But like certainly not the focus in the way that it is in Magic City or the end of TV. Yeah. So I feel like as we grew up too, like we started making this work in our early 20s, and you know, now we're in our 30s. I think work started to become more political and started to speak to and react to more of like what is happening in the world. And hopefully that's evident in the retrospective, like as you sort of see us grow up and see the different kinds of stories that we wanted to tell.
Well, I think our audience will be thrilled to dive in and celebrate seeing the works that you've created over this time. And we wish you all the best in your new productions that you're taking on and using to navigate this complex space that we're in right now. So again, congratulations to everyone. We'll post links for our audience to check out the retrospectacular, and please share with everyone at the company our continued thanks for being a part of the Purdue cultural community. You know, our audiences talk about the works that have been here over time, and so that means that your presence here doesn't just happen once and go away. It's part of a long-running conversation. And so in that sense, we still feel very closely connected to all of you, and continue to celebrate the work that you do. So thanks so much.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, it's totally our pleasure. We really appreciate it.
Great. Well, thanks for taking the time with us today, guys. And we'll hope to see you again soon.
Take care.
All right, take care. Bye-bye. Okay, Julia and Kyle, thank you so much for the opportunity to visit with you about your artistic work and lift the hood to get inside your motivations and inspirations and techniques. It was very, very fun. Our congratulations to all of you in Manual Cinema, and we wish you much success as you celebrate your 10th anniversary. And of course, here's to your next great decade. Look forward to cheering you on. Convos peeps, we will put links to Manual Cinema's great work right here for your convenience. And of course, as always, please be sure to support these independent artists and all independent artists as you take the opportunity to enjoy their work from the comfort of your couch or computer. It means a lot. We also below have a link for that Emmy Award winning documentary with the New York Times that we discussed called The Forger. And I encourage you to watch it. It is a powerful 16-minute journey that will offer you deep reflection on the idea that no one person is too small to make an impact with her or his own special talents. Entirely worthwhile to watch that. As always, it's great to have you with us here. And I'll also say that Convos too would continue to benefit from your support as we work to bring you a special array of offerings and creative pursuits for this coming fall. As always, it's great to have you along with us. Take care, be well, and we'll see you again soon.